Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Central Podcasting Unit. This is your host, Liam, joined in office by your co-host.
I'm not saying it.
All right, here we go again. You know, I have a dream, and that dream is to do a good introduction.
It's never going to happen.
You know,
I think last episode was the peak.
You know, now you're making it a nightmare. Okay? Is this really what you want to do?
We are off to a great start, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, ideally, theoretically, this is going to be a less goofy episode than last time. I say that, but we're also, I wouldn't say experimenting with a new format, so much as our last few episodes have been very structured.
Yeah, they have.
And we're loosey-goosey on the structure today.
No notes.
It's an exciting topic. This topic gets me all excited, at least. Some people might think this is a boring topic. We're going to be talking about hard drives today.
Yeah, we will.
Well, storage devices, I think, may be a better term, because a solid-state drive technically isn't a hard drive, you know.
It's not.
Doesn't have that hard disk. So
we will get into that,
We'll get into all of that. So ultimately, this kind of ranged from a discussion we had yesterday. So Wednesday, I had with somebody on a computer, or I had somebody in regards to their computer, and we were just talking about things like what's the optimal way to set up a solid-state drive, what's the optimal amount of solid-state drives to hard disk drives, why are hard disk drives better than solid-state drives and vice versa, you know, and also kind of hard drives as you can apply them in more of a higher capacity setting within a server, the basics of kind of an in-home server and the benefits to that depending on your use case. So a really interesting discussion, and I don't know how much of it we're going to get through today on this episode, but I think it is a good, interesting discussion to at least start.
Yeah, and kind of how far we've come in reality, yeah.
And make, you know, we're going to start off with hard drives, and then depending on how long we dwell on it, make our way into the basic in-home server and the benefits of that, and kind of how you want to set up your hard drives and that.
Yep.
So to just get started right off, what is a hard drive, commonly referred to as an HDD, and what is a solid-state drive or an SSD? You know, what are those differences?
So when you're talking about a hard drive, you know, an HDD, it's also referred to as a mechanical drive, and that's because there's moving parts inside of it.
Right.
There's a read head and a write head, and there's platters that it has to go through, and almost like a CD player.
Well, I almost like to think and compare it almost to like a record player.
Yeah, that's a better comparison,
because,
like a record player.
You know, you're almost etching grooves into it and reading them, just tiny little grooves.
Yep, and it's gotta go in a linear path.
And so that's one of those things that's interesting, you know, to stay on that record comparison is, I mean, you are physically etching into these metal-plated magnetic discs.
Yep.
I don't know if they're magnetic.
There's a magnet in it.
There's a magnet in it. Anyway, you're physically etching into these metal discs when you're putting data on a drive. Mm-hmm. And so what that means is that when you delete your data, you're basically writing over what used to be there. But it's a physical impression. So in theory, you know, data from hard disk drives, once deleted, can actually still be recovered, at least partially. And so that's a big discussion we've had internally, and we have with people we talk to, is about the practice of using refurbished hard disk drives, because there are security risks involved with that.
Sure.
So if you're, say, a corporation and you have your financial data on a computer and you upgrade that computer, if that hard disk drive makes its way into the hands of somebody with the knowledge and the know-how and the tools and the equipment and the dedication, that data theoretically can still get recovered. And so one of the things, and the reason I'm bringing this up, is one of the things that we have been seeing, as we've been getting more
Hmm.
involved and getting more developed in this IT scene, is a surprising amount of refurbished drives, which, again, in my opinion, from a great ethical standpoint, if you're selling a computer, that is a huge, huge no-no. And I really personally would only recommend a reused and refurbished hard drive, kind of if you're using it in a personal sense.
And only after it has been professionally cleaned,
Right, exactly.
professionally scrubbed.
Exactly. And as a company, you want to make sure that's what's happening to your hard drives. It's either being physically
Absolutely.
destroyed to the point where the
Absolutely.
data can't be recovered, like that one hard drive we had to take care of.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and those things are durable, mind you, hard to destroy physically.
Very, very
Speaking
hard.
from experience.
Yep.
Or again, professionally cleaned and so on and so forth. Which in many cases, I think a lot of these refurb drives aren't. And that actually
Yeah.
takes us to another example I just want to talk about briefly. A computer we've been working on. It's a high-end gaming computer, and the hard drive that was refurbished was actually a solid-state drive. And the technology difference between a hard disk drive and a solid-state drive isn't applicable for the moral of the story. But basically, what this was is it was a refurbished hard drive, and the person that was put it in the machine and sold this computer did not properly reformat and delete all the data on that drive. So there were issues caused because there were Windows 8 files and Windows 8 installations and so on and so forth, and all that software on a drive that had just had Windows 10 slapped on top of it, which was causing some problems
Yep.
with the machine. But what that also means is that for whoever had the computer previously, their core Windows data is there, and in theory, if we had wanted to, we could have recovered some of that person's personal data.
Yeah, and that's a really scary thought.
Because somebody that's pushing a refurbished hard drive is not taking care of it properly. So if you are, it's a part you don't want to skimp out on because of security, because of security, but also you just want to know what's happening to your information. You want to make sure your information is secure. So if you're going to recycle your hard drive, you need to make sure it's being done reputably and you're just not giving it or donating it to Joe Schmo. And you just really want to be, I don't know, I'm running out of things to say, but I think the point is very abundantly clear. You want to be safe with the disposal of your HDDs. And if you're buying a new computer, you don't want to be buying one with a reused hard drive unless your use case for that computer is very minimal, very casual, and you're just looking for a bargain computer. But if you're doing anything, I would even almost say to a moderate use case at the very minimum, you're going to want fresh, clean hard drives, because if you're in a business setting, you don't want old data and improperly taken care of drives causing problems on your business computers.
Yep.
If a drive's not properly being taken care of, or even, for example, a lot of scams are done through cleverly disguising files in what is actually refurbed and used hardware being sold at pennies. You know what I mean? So it's a huge security risk. And again, only if you're getting a refurbished drive, only get it from somebody you trust and who is trustworthy. But even then, be very careful and very cautious.
I'd go so far as to say, don't buy drives, even new drives, from a brand that you don't recognize
100%.
and don't trust. I've seen a lot of scams out there, primarily with flash drives, honestly. And let's talk about flash drives. That's part of storage.
It is.
Yeah. With where companies will flash the controller in the flash drive and tell it, no, you're not a 16 gig drive. You are a 64 gigabyte drive. So it'll report as having 64 gigabytes of potential space, but will really only have 16.
So I actually, interestingly enough, I watched a video today where instead of working, I was watching YouTube videos earlier today, spoiler alert, And I watched a video on a YouTube channel called Atomic Shrimp. And if you haven't checked out Atomic Shrimp, I would highly recommend it, because one of the things that Atomic Shrimp does is I don't want to throw the word harasses, but he scam baits to the extent where he just messes with scammers. But he'll also purchase things he knows are scams, and he tests them out. And I watched a video today about him testing it was a micro SD card that was being sold as being a 500 gigabyte
I think I've seen this video.
micro SD card. And it was very interesting because he downloaded a program that essentially dumps a bunch of data onto the device and tests to see if any of the data was lost. And the conclusion he came to was this: he only tested it for up to 32 gigabytes. And after 26 gigabytes, what was happening is all the data was being lost. So his conclusion was that he thinks it was like 32 gigabyte drive that failed quality assurance because it wasn't at a full 32 and was got in the hands of some scammers and was being sold and marked up as a 500 gigabyte drive. And mind you, this 500 gigabyte SD card supposedly sold for £8
That's
which
like,
is nothing.
That is something very, very suspicious. If you see like these huge capacity drives for that little, don't buy
Well,
it.
and that's what Atomic Shrimp says. If it's too good to be true, it is.
It is.
And so what I found very interesting, and I actually was not necessarily aware of, so if you copy quite literally, so say 300 gigabytes of data into a drive that's been set up like that, and it's only like 24 gigabytes, but it says it's 500. Because of that, typically what will happen is the hard drive will fill up, it is out of room, and the process will be stopped, and you'll get a message saying there's no more room in this drive, right? Well, because Windows thinks, or Linux or Mac, because he tested on Linux and Windows, and they all thought it was 500, because they think it's fine, what happens is they still allow the stuff to be transferred over to that drive. And so what's really interesting is you can actually see all the files, but the files are empty. There's nothing in them.
Interesting. So it's
at
like
a glance, at a glance, it looks like all your files are fine, but all of them are empty, and you've lost everything, and it's irrecoverable.
Yeah. So don't skimp. Do not skimp.
Don't skimp, and only buy hard drives, flash drives, and so on from reputable, trusted brands. And that's one of the things I really like about the drives that we've been buying and putting in computers that are going out from Basileus, is we're buying Seagate drives.
Yep.
We're buying Hewlett-Packard drives, reputable, well-known brands, and not cheap stuff coming out of China. Which actually we have an example of. Do you want me to grab it real quick, just to?
Yeah. Why don't you grab it real
Sure.
quick? And I'll try and fill some. Dead air here, while Liam's grabbing that drive. Yeah. So you really just, again, can't emphasize enough. Don't skimp on your drives, especially when it comes to SSDs, because in some instances with SSDs, even though the general perception is that they're going to be faster, when you get the cheaper drives, they can actually be slower than a mechanical drive. And it's a really interesting fact. But Liam's back. So
I'm back, and holding in my hands, I am holding a hard drive that came out of a computer that was being used in a public library. It's a 60 gigabyte drive, and unfortunately, I'm going to make you fill more dead air, because I just very quickly want to check what this retails at, to just talk about how cheap this thing is. It's a great discussion topic while I'm doing that.
What?
We talked about an HDD and the data being recovered off of that, and the fact that it's etched in and written, so on and so forth. Let me go look up this price, and why don't you go fill in the dead air with why the same is not the case with an SSD.
Okay, so you can't air quotes there recover data from an SSD in most instances because there's no physical platters to recover it from. There's no physical media in there that it's reading from. There's these NAND flash chips on the board that the data is being written to. That's why it's a solid state drive. You have a controller going to these flash chips in order to read and store data onto it, and it's a lot harder to recover something from that than a mechanical drive.
All right. Well, perfect timing. At it
Yeah,
again.
that worked out well.
So what I'm looking at here is a King Dian S200 60 gigabyte drive, and okay, so I have the exact one pulled up on Newegg, and this solid state drive, first of all, is retailing off of Newegg right now for $16.99. A couple things are really standing out to me about this drive. One, 60 gigabytes for $16.99.
Wow.
We're getting our 256 gigabyte drives. Are they 256 from Staples?
Yeah,
Or
I'd
are we
like to
getting
say
I think it's 256, or
Yeah.
are we getting the fives?
we've been getting the 256 recently.
Right, so we've been getting 256 drives for, honestly, probably just about double the cost of this. So a little over two of these is equal to one of the HP drives we've been getting, and we're getting more than double the data.
Yep.
So this honestly is not even a good value, in my opinion.
No, it's really not.
It's taking a look at this price. Like somebody might say, "Oh, a 16 gigabyte solid state drive or a 60 gigabyte solid state drive. Like I just need something very basic." This is not a good value. But on top of that, we physically, and unfortunately, everybody who's here with us, Noah, myself, and we have a new intern with us now, Derek. Say hi, Derek. Hi, Derek. Nice to meet you.
Yes.
Hear more from Derek at a later date. I've all had them do a comparison because we have a Kingston solid state drive in here, and it is 4 or 5 times the weight of this King Dian drive.
It feels flimsy.
It feels bad. And
Yeah.
it's being shipped from China. Newegg says it directly.
Mm-hmm.
It's an off-brand. It's cheap. And as Noah had talked about with a solid-state drive, the odds of your data being recovered are next to nothing with an SSD. In this machine, this specific drive here was being used in a library. So luckily, the drive failing means that no critical data was lost because it was a public computer in a library. But still, if you personally are looking for hard drives, you want to find a reputable brand. I will say this. Just about all the mainstream computer manufacturers are using reputable brands, if not their own proprietary hard drives, which in and of themselves are going to be reputable because of they're with the big brands. And if you're buying a computer from an off-brand, that's also in and of itself its own problem.
Yeah.
So, how much detail? I mean, we just sidetracked. I'm sorry. This is not where I thought this episode was going to go. And I'm just asking because I'd stepped away a couple times. How much detail have we gone into the difference between an SSD and an HDD?
Just the basics of the fact that an SSD is going to is solid state, and there's NAND flash chips on it that store the data versus platters.
So there's no moving parts. That's
exactly.
the big thing. And again, because there's no moving parts, it's harder to recover the data because that physical impression isn't there. It's primarily all electronic, and done through signals and so on and so forth, where that storage is happening and the recovery and so on.
However, there's less failure points.
There are, exactly. And so, in theory, a solid-state drive is going to be more reliable. The problem is when that drive fails, because everything fails at some point, your odds of getting a safe recovery back are just much lower. And typically the cost of a solid-state drive is going to be much higher than from a hard disk drive. So,
although even that price has come down significantly from what it used to be.
I don't even want to. What was the size of the drive you were looking at getting? Were you asking about a terabyte M.2? Yeah, so Derek, our intern, was asking about M.2 drives, and we'll touch on the specificity in regards to what an M.2 is in a minute. but basically it's a solid state drive. And he was curious as to whether it would be worth getting a terabyte one. And honestly, personally, if I'm being completely honest with you, I would say no. In most use cases, it's not worth getting a terabyte solid state drive, and it's going to cost you. Why don't you pull up, just see what the cost of a 1 terabyte M.2 drive is? But what it's going to cost you now, just 5 years from now, I can't even imagine how low that price is going to be, because memory prices have just been declining so heavily. And it's every kind of memory. It's RAM. It is just SSDs. It is HDDs, flash drives, the whole 9 yards. Memory prices are just going down. So an SSD, because of that, solid-state drives are significantly faster than hard disk drives, but again, they're more expensive. So typically, you want to be using smaller solid-state drives. And what they're really good for are critical processes. Do you have a price?
I have 2 prices to
Okay.
just to compare it. So we have your. So I'm looking at a Samsung 970 Evo.
Okay.
And NVMe M.2 drive.
M.2.
We'll go into
M.2 in a minute.
Yep. So this is a 1 terabyte drive for $179.
There was my attempt at a whistle.
180. Compare that to a WD Blue 1 terabyte, which you can get on Amazon right now. Prime
and
delivery.
That's a hard disk drive.
Yep, and that's a hard drive.
Blue.
Yep, that's an HDD for $39.99.
Yeah. Quite a difference. But again, that SSD is going to be so much faster. So from my understanding, we are coming on to like 21 minutes now. So I want to shift into something I really want to make sure we cover here.
Yeah.
Typically, you're going to want a smaller solid-state drive.
Yes.
It's going to be primarily used for core functions. And so what you see a lot of people do, and really is, in my opinion, a best practice, is having a solid-state drive where your operating system is installed and keeping all of your other data on large capacity hard disk drives. That's personally what I do. I have a 246 gig solid state drive. It is a Toshiba drive in my personal computer. And then I have two 2 terabyte hard drives, which is overkill. But that's because when I built my computer, I was stupid and didn't know you had to partition your drive.
Anyways,
if you need the speed of a solid state drive, then it might be worth buying a large capacity one. And I'm talking if you're doing heavy graphics editing, heavy video editing, if you're competitive in gaming, for your high-end computer use case uses, a high capacity solid state drive may be worth it for you. But if you do that, I highly recommend, again, that you keep the operating system on its own drive. Because the more that drive fills up, and this is true with hard disk drives, the more the drive fills up, the more the drive has to go through to do what you want it to do, and it's going to slow the whole machine down. So by keeping the operating system isolated to its own hard drive, you're going to allow the background, the computer, the operating system to run faster, which is going to speed up everything else.
Yep.
So very quickly, Noah, what is an M.2? Go.
So an M.2 drive is it's based on the NVMe standard, which is
like an architecture.
Yeah, it's similar to an architecture. It's a standard of storage, but it's just been shrunk right down.
Sure.
Yeah, it's different from SATA. It's faster than SATA.
Really?
Yeah, it's a lot faster than SATA. So M.2 drives are faster than your typical SATA drive.
And they're very common nowadays in like laptops or small compact computers.
Yep.
Very convenient, much easier to install and handle than traditional hard drives. And again, probably a bit more durable than SATA, because SATA is renowned for being a, what's the word? Brittle.
Yeah, it's a brittle connector.
You don't want to be pulling things in and out, put much pressure on it.
I think the insertion rate is like
it's like 6 or 7. Yeah,
it's
bad.
more than 6 or 7, but it's not great.
Yeah,
you don't want to be pulling that out and plugging it in a lot. Yeah,
I think that's just about it. Which is convenient because we are coming on to the 25th minute.
Oh boy, is this the first time where we're actually not going to run over?
No, because we're definitely going to run over by procrastinating and talking, because we are at. Oh, would you look at the time? What's that? We got 20 seconds to get it
Okay.
under 25.
Thank you for listening.
Whoa. Do you think I'm going to give you the courtesy and the satisfaction of wrapping this up in time? I'm guaranteeing that this is going to run over.
Listen, I have one thing to tell you. My name's Noah.
And this has been the Central Podcasting Unit. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening. We have had a great time. Well, we went over the 25-minute mark. What do you want me to do?
Thank you to Derek for being in office with us today.
What an absolute man. Thank you
Yeah,
very much,
thank you.
Derek. I'll throw some claps out there. It's been a great episode. It's been a fun episode.
Yep.
It's been a bit all over the place episode. Good information, I think. Hopefully this has cleared hard drives up a bit more. And I think we will be doing an episode in the near future continuing hard drives and talking about basic NAS servers.
There is so much more to cover.
Yeah, so much more to cover. So stay tuned for that. Thank you very much for listening. And
We will see you next time.
Yeah, see you next time. Have a great day.
See you later.
See you. Bye.